In 1530, the Portuguese colonized Brazil under the Treaty of Tordesillas, and although Brazil was granted independence on September 7, 1822, Portuguese influence is still quite evident in modern-day Brazil. Officially known as the Republic of Brazil, Brazil is the largest country in South America and the Southern Hemisphere, and the fifth largest nation in the world. The total area of this South American powerhouse is 8,505,770 square kilometers. Interestingly enough, Brazil's total area is that of the 48 contiguous states in the United States. Brazil shares a border with every South American country except for Chile and Ecuador. The terrain is for the most part rolling lowlands, especially in the north, but there are few hills and mountains throughout the country. Central Brazil is dominated by the Brazilian highlands, sometimes called the Plateau of Brazil. The country is famously known as the land of the Amazon, as the river basin runs through it. Brazilian climate is tropical in the north and temperate in the south. Because of its geographical expanses, Brazil is split into 5 distinctive regions, each with their own local diversity. These divisions exist largely for administrative purposes, such as the Brazilian census, and therefore correspond with social, economic, and cultural nuances. The 5 regions are based on navigational directions: the norte, north, nordeste, northeast, centro-oeste, central-west, sudeste, southeast, and sul, south. Brazil has the 8th largest economy in the world, with a total GDP that is roughly $2.246 trillion, with much of that coming from agricultural and manufacturing industries. Brazil's tropical climate makes it one of the leading providers of coffee, sugarcane, and citrus. The manufacturing industry consists of textile, lumber, and cement, amongst other things. Its GDP per capita is $11,384.4. The population of Brazil is 202.8 million people and is expected to grow with a natural increase rate of 8.8%. Brazil contains a highly educated society with a literacy rate of 91%, which contributes to its economic success. Its infant mortality rate is 14, which is considered higher than those of first world countries. However, Brazil is on the come up and is considered a developing country, in the same league as Russia, India, China, and South Africa. When the Portuguese colonized Brazil in 1530, they brought a unique folk culture to the region. For example, gender relations and roles in Brazil formed as a result of the Portuguese concept of machismo, meaning male dominance. Brazilian women are seen as inferior to their male counterparts and account for only 2% of the executive workforce. Although Brazil grants most cultural roots to Portugal, there are still some folk cultural traditions that are uniquely Brazilian. Diet is one of these. Rice, beans, and manioc, which is a root crop, are the core behind the Brazilian diet, and people of all socioeconomic classes consume them daily. Meat and poultry, on the other hand, are usually only present on every upper-class dinner table. These food groups are uniform throughout the nation. However, there is some variety in different regions of the country. In the Northeast, for example, there are many dishes with African origin because of the abundance of forced slaves that migrated. On the other hand, world-famous Brazilian barbecue has its roots in the South. Food distribution is highly based on ethnicity of original migrants. The country is flooded with large land holdings due to its agrarian roots. Estates occupy 40% of agricultural land and employ large amounts of coerced labor. This folk tradition is uniquely Brazilian because it stems directly from the geography of the region. In the last 75 years, Brazil has become a more and more urban society. Urban architecture derives from the legacy of Portuguese colonialism. Rio de Janeiro is modeled off of ancient Portuguese cities. The importance of football, or soccer as Americans call it, is insurmountable in Brazilian society. Brazil is home to the only team in history that has qualified for every single World Cup. Soccer has united a heterogeneous country into one uniform nation. And although soccer was introduced to Brazil by the Europeans, its unifying power has been strictly Brazilian. Music and dance is a huge part of Brazilian culture. The samba is a musical genre and dance style that originated in Brazil with the African migrants' introduction of their native music and dance to the country. Over time, the music and dance became so popular that it has become annually performed at Brazil's world-famous Carnival. Brazil's folk culture is a combination of Portuguese tradition mixed with the culture of later migrants. Because of the overpopulated cities, an emergence of pop culture in Brazil was inevitable. McDonald's and hip-hop music are omnipresent in Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Brasilia. However, Brazil has not had a negative reaction to these elements of pop culture and is making unique Brazilian adjustments to them, such as the relatively new Brazilian hip hop industry. Furthermore, Brazil has managed to preserve its folk culture while still embracing elements of pop culture. The internet, television, and social media are all relatively available, especially in the cities. However, the poorer, more rural areas of the North are not up to date with much of the 21st century technology. Globalization has had an immense effect on clothing style. Traditional German, Russian, and Italian immigrant clothing has been replaced with jeans and t-shirts. However, what has remained constant is Brazil's love of dance and sport. Because Brazil's folk culture is already a melting pot of a variety of different European and African cultures, the government has not had much of a response to the emergence of pop culture, and even encourages mass fast food chains such as McDonald's to stimulate the economy. Brazilians also have a strong sense of patriotism, so pop culture does not serve as a threat for any sort of abandonment of native tradition. Luckily for Brazilians, pop culture has not had an adverse effect on the environment. However, what it has done is emphasize the differences between the rich cities and impoverished rural countryside. As a result, urban Brazilians have developed a supremacist complex and believe that their rural counterparts are worldless. Pop culture has not impacted the environment itself, but it has certainly affected the attitudes of Brazilians. With Portuguese colonization in the 16th century came the introduction of their language into Brazilian society. Today, nearly all Brazilians speak Portuguese, which is a Romance language belonging to the Indo-European family. The indigenous languages of Brazil included Arawakan, Gi, Carib, and Tupi-Guarani. Today, these languages have been eradicated in terms of actual number of speakers, but certain words from these languages, particularly Tupi-Guarani, have been added to today's Brazilian Portuguese, which differs from the language spoken in Portugal because it is uniquely Brazilian. Regional accents are present, but they are not major as the language is the same. Portuguese has had a large imprint on the cultural landscape of Brazil because of, once again, the importance of cities. With the relevance of Portuguese colonialism in cities came the diffusion of language. This hierarchical diffusion is what spread Portuguese throughout the large country that is Brazil. Urbanization was in part made possible because of the common language. This factor helped void any barriers that would have prevented poorer migrants from moving to cities. Brazilians, on the whole, are very proud of their linguistic history. Listen here to hear some important Portuguese phrases.
Good morning. Bom dia.
Roman Catholicism is the dominant religion of Brazil and is practiced by 73% of Brazilians. The Portuguese brought this religion with them when they colonized the country. Separation between church and state exists, but the two often work together for welfare, educational, and other administrative purposes. Because of Christianity's status as a universalizing religion, the Portuguese made sure to convert the indigenous Brazilians to Roman Catholicism. Most of the rest of Brazil is Protestant, but indigenous and African religions are also present, though in small amounts. The concept of folk Catholicism exists in that central and northeastern practices are more traditional and strict than those in the more urban south. Brazil has always prided itself on its religious tolerance, and although Roman Catholicism is the majority, indigenous, African, and Protestant denominations are accepted. Religion is so important in Brazil that there are over 300 cathedrals in the country. Some of the most famous are the Metropolitan Cathedral of Brasilia and the Dom Bosco Sanctuary Brasilia. The world-famous statue of Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro is evidence of Catholicism's impact on the landscape. There are also many Brazilian cemeteries, as Catholics bury the dead. These too are found throughout the country. The ethnic diversity of Brazil is perhaps one of the most complex in the world. There are German, Italian, Lebanese, African, Japanese, Southeast Asian, Eastern European, and Portuguese descendants sprawled throughout the country. Interestingly enough, Brazil's ethnic history did not start out this way. In the 16th century, the government greatly encouraged Northern European immigration as a way of keeping the country white. They believed that by whitening their country, it would become elite and economically successful. However, the European elites needed labor to work their plantations, and the forced African slave labor added more color to the population. Until 1870, the nation was predominantly classified as black or mixed ancestry. In that same decade, European migration to Brazil was higher than it had ever been before, with a few thousand Germans and Spaniards. In 1888, slavery was abolished, and a new wave of immigration occurred, bringing Lebanese, Japanese, Southeast Asian, and Eastern European immigrants to the country. This wave of migration brought in more than 2.5 million immigrants. This wave set precedent for the future ethnic diversity of Brazil and established what it meant to be Brazilian. Today, Brazil is home to millions of ethnically diverse descendants. Nationalism and Brazilian pride is a prime example of the centripetal forces that help unite the country. Brazilians are extremely proud of their cultural identity and are avid patriots. Despite their varying ethnicities, they all unite in their national pride. Religion is another centripetal force. Political unrest and riots following Brazil's World Cup loss in 2014 are an example of a centrifugal force. The riots started in Brasilia, the nation's capital, and eventually spread throughout the country. Brazil is a heterogeneous country with cultural, linguistic, religious, and ethnic influence coming from around the world. However, all Brazilians are able to unite in that they are part of one of the greatest developing nations in the world.
Traz a lenha pro fogão, vem fazer armação.